Jews have an interesting relationship with rules. And that places rabbis like myself in kind of an awkward situation. To overgeneralize, there are 3 different approaches to rules in Jewish tradition. One approach, rules are more like guidelines. They have a voice, but not a veto. The details of the rules aren't necessarily that important, but the culture that creates the rules, the culture that the rules creates, that's what's important. We may break the rules, but we still want to stay true to the essence of the culture and the tradition. Perhaps the rules aren't relevant, but the culture is who we are. Another approach. Rules are meant to be followed. They came from the mouth of God and were received by Moses at Mount Sinai, including commandments about having 2 sets of dishes and instructions on how to kosher a microwave. We follow the rules because they create a set of behaviors and practices that enable us to live a Jewish life. Who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want to follow the rules? Now, a third approach. This is definitely the least popular. Rules are an ongoing conversation. Yes, the original Jewish rules came from Mount Sinai, but God and Moses didn't know from microwaves or light switches, or, for that matter, men being restricted to marry only one wife. As time moves forward and culture changes, the rules have to change along with them. This makes things complicated, and particularly in our day and in our generations when it comes to the issue of the relationship between women and men. In the times of the Torah, men and women played separate and distinct roles in society. But today, we want our men to be eligible for parental leave from their jobs. We want our girls to grow up to be doctors and lawyers and astronauts. This means we need to update the rules, and this means we're in an ongoing conversation about how to do that. All right, so based on only what I've already said, we Jews have a very interesting relationship with rules, which for rabbis like myself presents quite the nuanced challenge. Then, we have this week's parashah, Ki Teitzei. We read at the very beginnings of this week's parashah, this is chapter 21, verse 15. If a man has 2 wives, one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved have borne him sons, but the firstborn is the son of the unloved one, when the father wills his property to his sons, he may not treat as firstborn the son of the loved one in disregard of the son of the unloved one who is older. Instead, he must accept the firstborn, the son of the unloved one, and allot to him a double portion of all he possesses. Since he is the first fruit of his vigor, the birthright is his due. I was listening to this being read from our Sefer Torah on this very bima on Thursday of this week, read so beautifully by Jonathan Marcus, and it occurred to me, wait a second, the instructions from this week's parashah is like the exact opposite of what happens in the family of our patriarch Jacob with his wives Rachel and Leah. We know, of course, that Leah was the unloved wife, the less favored wife, and she gave birth to Jacob's first child, her son, Reuben. And the way Reuben's life unfolded gave him lots of reasons to say, "What am I, chopped liver?" Furthermore, his attempts to assert his authority as the firstborn were ultimately for naught, because, as we know, the firstborn of the loved wife, Rachel, her son Joseph, he was the special son, he received the special coat, and he had a special place in the destiny of his family, of our Jewish family. So, what about our rules? What about the instructions in our parashah? Do they matter or not? So we continue on our parashah right where we left off, the very next verse, chapter 21, verse 18, and here we go. If a man has a wayward and defiant son, who does not heed his father or mother, and does not obey them even after they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the public place of the community. They shall say to the elders of his town, "This son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He does not heed us. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Thereupon, the men of his town shall stone him to death. Okay. So these are our rules, and hopefully all of us are reading this and hearing this and are somewhere within the range of asking some questions and making outright objections. Hopefully we're asking, with thoughtfulness and with feeling, what's going on with our rules? What about the instructions in our parashah? Do they matter or not? It turns out that this selection from our parashah about the wayward and defiant son is explored at length in the Talmud and Tractate Sanhedrin. And, wait for it, this is totally predictable and completely confusing, the Talmud interprets the selection in two different ways. One interpretation validates the instruction of our parashah and explains why. The other interpretation practically erases this instruction from our parashah, and it also explains why. Like I said, we Jews have a very interesting relationship with rules, and it puts rabbis like myself in kind of an awkward situation. So, the Talmud and Tractate Sanhedrin validates this instruction from our parashah and explains why. The sugya, or the section that does so, it's actually the second sugya from the Talmud that I ever learned, and my teacher was Rabbi Yehuda Hausman. So the Talmud states, Ben Sora Umore Nidon al Shem Sofo. We judge the wayward and defiant son according to how we know he will turn out. If he's wayward and defiant in his youth, and he won't heed his own parents, he will surely fail to heed the laws of society. We must punish him now for the safety of the community. Punishing him now may be regrettable, but it's for the greater good. The Talmud and Tractate Sanhedrin also states, I learned this later on from my teacher, Rabbi Adam Greenwald, and here I'll paraphrase a little bit more. So what exactly is the interpretation of the verses? What do these verses mean? What would it look like in a practical example for the conditions in this instruction to be satisfied such that punishment would be warranted? Well, it would require the parents, the two parents, to have the same voice, to have the same height, and to have the same appearance. All right, so if you're hearing that and thinking, where did the Talmud get that from? That doesn't make any sense. You're onto something. The Talmud does provide an explanation of how it interprets the verses that way, but admittedly, it doesn't really make sense, even though it's our tradition, even though it is holy. And so the Talmud continues, now since it is absolutely impossible, it's never going to happen for the parents to have the same voice, to be the same height, and to have the same appearance, it is thus the case that there never has been and never will be a wayward and defiant son as described in these verses. So then the Talmud asks a question. Why is it that these verses were included in the Torah? That they created a rule that we couldn't follow? And then the Talmud answers the question, and the answer is, these verses are included in the Torah to give all Jews throughout the generations, the opportunity to study them. I don't know about you, but that one's kind of a head scratcher. It might even seem that this explanation is weak, and in a sense, perhaps it is. But in another sense, the explanation is profound. It advances this idea that there are verses in Torah, that there are rules, there are mitzvot that exist just so we can study them, not so we can follow them. Now, to be honest, I'm not immediately familiar with other Jewish rules besides this one that exists just so we can study it and not so we can follow it. But hey, Torah is vast. I'm a human being. I can hold space for the possibility. There are things out there in Torah that I have yet to learn. But I don't really think there are lots of rules that exist for the purpose of study and not for the purpose of instruction. But there's at least this one, and the idea is in our tradition, the idea is out there. It's fascinating. So I remember a conversation I had with a friend a number of years ago. This person is smart, thoughtful, well-educated, went to Jewish day school and a top university, and this person's not a rabbi. This person wasn't in the habit of keeping Shabbat and kind of kept kosher in their home, but not always outside the home, And I said to this person one time, you're not observant, meaning you're not living your life in accordance with Jewish law. Now, this person objected strongly. They completely disagreed. For them, they knew what the laws were. They had studied them. Knowing how to live a Jewish life was their essence. Following the law, in their eyes, didn't have any bearing on whether or not they were observant. Now, at the time I was in rabbinical school, and I was equal parts perplexed and kind of offended. I took this personally. Being observant means following the rules. That's how it works. And now, with the perspective of time, 7 years in rabbinical school, 7 years in the field as a rabbi, reading this week's parashah, I feel honestly humbled. It's my responsibility at Adat Shalom, in our community, to teach our community about what it means to observe mitzvot. It's my responsibility to make sure the meals we serve are kosher. It's my responsibility to make sure we keep Shabbat in our sanctuary. That's what my teachers were counting on me to do when they wrapped me in a talit gave me ordination, saying once I was their student and now I'm their colleague. So that's how rabbis feel about it. That's how rabbis are in relationship with Jewish rules, with our mitzvot. That's not how all Jews feel, and I get that, but that's how my teachers are counting on me to feel. So I'll close with this, a teaching from Rabbi Shais Taub. I've never met him in person, not yet, but I've learned with him a lot through books and podcasts and video classes. He describes Jewish rules. He describes our mitzvot as an expression of intimacy between God and humankind. It's as if God says to us, you know what really makes me uncomfortable? When you eat bacon cheeseburgers and pepperoni pizza and oysters on the half shell. I hate when you do that. Could you please not do that? And you know what I love? When you say the Shema in the morning when you get up and in the evening when you lie down. I love when you do that. Could you set some alarms on your phone or something to make sure you remember to do that? It would mean a lot to me. In other words, God wants to be close to us. God wants us to know what God wants of us, and God is really happy when we do just that. We're moving closer and closer, of course, towards our holidays, our days of Teshuvah. Some of us are thinking about our relationship with God, and some of us are thinking about where we're going in life and what changes we need to ensure that we get there. Whatever your understanding of God may be, whatever perspective on Jewish rules you may hold, this is our time of year to draw close to what we know to be true and to re-examine those ways that aren't working for us as well as they used to. This is our time for connection, and this is our time for belonging. And this is our time for taking action, for changing our lives and supporting our community in all the ways that are most meaningful for us. Shabbat Shalom.